or lose fat, but it's not always about diet. And there's a lot of questions out there right now about intermittent fasting, keto, low carb, what's the right thing, eat protein, no protein, eat all the fat. Candace, I'm going to toss that one over to you. Um, is a keto diet okay? Is intermittent fasting a good way to support our weight loss? What should we be looking for?
Thanks, Brenda. You made some really good points there in that anytime you're looking for an eating pattern, you really need to pay attention to how your body feels. So it's not just about losing weight. It's really about feeling healthy and having energy. So keep that in mind. But let's talk a little bit about two of the fad diets right now. One is intermittent fasting, and there's a couple different varieties of this. Sometimes people will fast 1 or 2 days a week or every other day. But the more common is to extend the overnight fast. So your eating period each day is maybe only 4 to 8 hours long. It's not a calorie restriction diet per se. There's no rules about reducing calories. However, most people just naturally do because their eating window is smaller. So it has been shown to improve the body's insulin levels and cholesterol levels. It also reduces inflammation markers. And all of those things are associated with the big four: type 2 diabetes, obesity, cancer, and heart disease. However, there's not a ton of research, or human research rather, on intermittent fasting. So we don't totally know the long-term effects of this. But there's a lot of research done on Ramadan and different religious fasting holidays that shows that this is pretty safe for most people. It's definitely not recommended for anybody who's pregnant or trying to get pregnant. If you have diabetes, you should proceed with caution. Talk to your dietitian or your doctor before you try this. Certainly not for anybody with a history of eating disorder. That can be really tricky. And then for keto is a very low carb, high fat diet. So about 5% of your calories come from mostly low carb vegetables. And then about 75% of your diet comes from fat. So people eat a lot of fish, eggs, dairy, meat, butter, lard, nuts and seeds. So this one is more concerning to me. The typical diet is really more like 50% carbs. So the foundation of a healthy diet is really fruits, vegetables, whole grains. So anytime you take 50% and cut it down to 5%, you're looking at potential micronutrient deficiencies. And then when you add high fat, that can lead to high blood pressure, cardiovascular disease, any number of conditions. So again, we don't have a lot of long-term research on the effects of keto. We do know that it was developed as kind of a last resort diet for children with drug-resistant epilepsy to control seizures. So I wouldn't recommend following this diet without a good medical reason. Anytime you're cutting out whole food groups, there's room for error. We also find that it can be really tough to follow. People tend to lose weight rapidly on this diet, but then it plateaus. And so I think when you're looking for an eating pattern, you really want to look for something that's sustainable for you long term. It can also lead to disordered eating. In the short term, people tend to feel fatigue, nausea, dizziness. People tend to have low fiber intake. So what I would recommend is anytime you're looking for a weight loss diet, the gold standard really is to reduce calories. The typical treatment for overweight or obesity is to reduce calories by 20 to 30%. And this is bad news. Nobody wants to hear this, but that's usually for life. It's not usually just for that weight loss period. Usually you have to maintain that. So you want to find a diet that you can really follow long term. And then you really want to pay attention to how you feel. If you're feeling dizzy and nauseous and tired, it's probably a sign that it's not a healthy diet for you. So I would always be more concerned about what you're eating and how much, as opposed to what time you're eating it or cutting out large food groups.
Thanks, Candace. The very first call, or very first question we had, Mary mentioned part of the quarantine 15 that many of us have been dealing with is because we are home and spaghetti sauce, or find other ways to hide some of those vegetables. Candace, you know, kids can be very simple eaters, and adults who struggle with mixing foods and textures. Single parents, parents that are working full time and trying to educate their kids at home. Do you have resources for simple, quick, nutritious recipes, pre-prep food? How do we make sure we're getting enough fruits and vegetables in the day? Help.
Yeah, this is tough. And so first, I just want to commend the people who asked this question. I think especially when you're trying to feed kids and teach them healthy eating habits, it is so hard. I mean, you're literally up against a food industry that is pumping billions of dollars into messaging, telling your kids to eat unhealthy food. Not to mention, you know, the kids at school and maybe grandpa is saying, ew, vegetables. So it's really, really hard. And it's also such a wonderful gift that you're giving your kids by teaching them to eat healthy. So even if they aren't now, maybe in the future they will, and they'll really appreciate it. So the first rule, and I'm going to admit this is much easier said than done, but the first rule is that the parents and caregivers decide what is served and when, and the kid decides if they eat and how much. That means sometimes the kids don't eat because they choose not to. And as caregivers, it's so hard because we have to let them make that decision. And it's really important too, because we want them to learn to listen to their internal signals for hunger and fullness. We also want them to learn to listen to any signals that, like, this isn't feeling good in my body. You know, maybe there's an intolerance or something that they need to learn to pay attention to. The last thing we want to teach them is to override those systems. So once again, parents decide what is served and when, and kids decide if they eat and how much. So one thing that you can do is limit snacks. So often kids are just snacking all day long, and then of course they're not hungry at dinner, and maybe they're a little bit more picky about, I don't like this texture, or you stirred frozen peas and corn into my macaroni and cheese and I'm not going to eat it now. When they're actually hungry, they might actually eat that. So that's my first tip. Next is to make sure that you're role modeling eating healthy for your kids, and you can talk about why too. I like to get more specific, and we'll drop some resources into the chat, but don't just say it's good for you. I mean, it is, but kids like to know why, and they're pretty responsive if you tell them, you know, eating vegetables gives you the nutrition your body needs to fix an owie or fight a cold. So that sort of thing, just explaining to them why we do it can be helpful. And then maybe talk to them about, what would you like to eat? You know, we have to eat our vegetables. How do you like to eat them? Which ones do you like? That's always okay to include them in the conversation and cooking. Another idea is to have a little family taste off. Some kids like different textures, just like adults. So maybe take your broccoli and you can roast it, steam it, eat it raw, put it in the air fryer, and just see what everybody in the family likes. I also wouldn't hesitate to do things like Brenda was saying, you know, eat your veggies with some hummus or a delicious sauce. You know, you can put some cheese sauce on the kids' vegetables. That's fine. It's also helpful to enlist all of the caregivers in the family. So, you know, sometimes one caregiver will undermine the healthy vegetables message. So if you just tell, you know, friends and family, we're really struggling with this, please don't say anything about, you know, vegetables are yucky to the kids. That can be helpful. And as we know, sometimes kids take advice better from somebody else. So that's also an option to, you know, maybe enlist the cool big cousin or the babysitter and have them talk to kids about it. There's also some resources out there. PBS Kids has a nutrition channel, so that can be an opening for conversation. Let's see, it's nutrition.gov, I believe, has some great materials that you can even use when you're homeschooling your kids this fall to talk about nutrition and healthy eating. And then for older kids, you can look at maybe what a celebrity or an athlete is saying about nutrition. Maybe they're on the Today Show or something talking about it. That can be a really great opener. Or, I just read this study about how, I don't know, nutrition can help prevent COVID, something like that. What do you think? What can we incorporate into our day? And then I definitely do the sneaking vegetables into meals too. Even as an adult, you want to get at least 3 servings of vegetables a day. That can take some effort, even 5 or 10 servings is even better. So it can be tough to eat all those vegetables. So I like to hide frozen vegetables in things. It's really easy to do. If you're making a fruit smoothie, you can easily put some frozen cauliflower or beets or in there. I do the spinach and pasta sauce thing too. That works pretty well. And, I'm sure a lot of the parents out there have their own tips. So I encourage you to drop into chat, what does your family do? What have you found that works?